Assalamu alaikum students. So today's topic is parametric equations with a restricted domain. So today's topic about converting parametric equations to the rectangular form with restricted domain. Here you can see they did not give you any interval for t, but we know that if t is in the denominator, then t cannot be equal to 0, because if t is equals to 0, this will be undefined. Let's change these parametric equations to the rectangular form. So what we have to do is we need to solve for t. I'm going to start with this. It becomes tx equals t plus 2. I multiplied by t. Subtract t on both sides. Tx minus t equals to 2. Factor out t, I get t. X minus 1 equals to 2. Divide both sides by that factor. I get t equals 2 over x minus 1. Now this is what one thing I got, t equals x minus 1. We know in the final equation I will get in terms of y. From here we know that if x is equals to 1, 1 minus 1 will become 0. We have to keep this in mind. In the previous questions, we did not have any reciprocal function. That's why there was no problem in those questions. But here we need to keep this in mind, that the domain would be x should not be equal to 0 in the final answer. Now let's plug in this into this one. I get y equals 1 over, actually it's the reciprocal, 1 over t. This means it's going to be the reciprocal 1 over 2 divided by x minus 1. So I get y equals x minus 1 over 2. This is going to be my final rectangular form, keeping in mind the restriction for domain x cannot be equal to 1, because if x was equal to 1, this t would become undefined. So the domain is x is not equal to 1. The next one is this question, square root form. Here also they did not give us any restriction for t, but we know that because it's the square root, the restricted domain is this part cannot be negative, right? Because if inside the square root, if you get a negative term, this will end up with a complex form. So we know the domain for t is this part has to be greater than or equal to 0, right? So t should be greater than or equal to 3. Okay. So let's solve for t here. I get square root of t. Isolate this part. We get x minus 5. I just subtracted 5 on both sides. Now I square both sides. I get t minus 3 equals x minus 5 whole squared. Then I get, make sure you FOIL it, it becomes x squared minus 10x plus 25. Add 3 on both sides. I get t equals x squared minus 10x plus 28. This is the value of t, what I got right now. At this point, we are going to figure it out what x should be so that we can figure out for the domain. Okay, first let's substitute this into y. I get y equals 1/2 of t, and t is this x squared minus 10x plus 28 plus 8. I end up with y equals 1/2 of x squared minus 5x plus 14 plus 8, which ends up with 1/2 x squared minus 5x plus 22. Keeping in mind the restriction. The restriction we know as y is depending on x and x was depending on t. And we know that t has to be greater than 3. So to find the domain, to find the domain, we know that x squared minus 10x plus 28 should be greater than or equal to 3 because t is greater than or equal to 3. That's why I replaced this t by 3. Solve x squared minus 10x. Subtract 3 on both sides. I get plus 25 greater than or equal to 0. Now this is the complete square or factor out 25. I get 5 and 5. So the two factors are x minus 5, x minus 5 greater than 0. Because 5 times 5 is 25, negative 5 and negative 5 gives me negative 10. X minus 5 whole square should be greater than or equal to 0. When I take square root on both sides, I get x minus 5 greater than or equal to 0. Here I get x is greater than or equal to 5. So my domain is that x should be greater than 5. This is my rectangular form of the equation and this is the domain. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.